Chris just offered me a position full-time to be one of us.
Holy shit. One of us, dude.
One of us.
Are you going to sit in today?
No?
You sure?
Want me to?
I mean,
you can always
it's
sit in.
always good. Happy Monday, everybody.
Happy Monday. I'm on the ones and twos.
Card says one of us. The higher up you get in any business, the more autonomy you seemingly have. You are tied less to a schedule that requires you to be in a specific place at a specific time and free of the day-to-day things that are necessary for daily operations. Maybe. As an owner, how do you stay connected with your team? If you're in leadership, yeah, you're going to need to sit in on this one. If you're in leadership, how do you connect with team members that are above or below you? How do you keep a team feeling close and small when things get big?
I want to make you feel so small, Chris. Wiser, you want to sit on this one? Or want to ask some clarifying questions? He loves
got
it.
him.
He actually really likes to be on the podcast anyway.
I know, dude.
He's
He's
just
just
pretending
waiting
like he
for
doesn't.
an invitation.
I know. He's like, you know what? I'm looking to be the next bro Rogan. Well, while you're waiting, don't forget to sign on to our website, catandcloud.com, and check out the subscription service because it will do you right. It'll show up for you almost as much as we show up for you.
Chris, I'm sitting next to the poison now.
Cusco's poison? The poison chosen specifically for Cusco?
Cusco's poison.
Cusco's poison. That poison?
That poison.
That poison.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Kronk out. Yeah, he's doing his own theme music.
He's doing his own theme.
Dumb and tone deaf.
Hi.
Hi, Michael.
Hey.
How was that card? Fun thing.
It's a good card.
I wrote this card before Friday's meeting.
What happened on Friday's meeting?
Yeah, what happened on
Was
Friday's?
I even there? Just kidding. You don't have to refresh me.
I actually forgot for a second what did happen on Friday's meeting.
A lot of emotions.
It was a very, it was a good one.
Still got them. They're not quite gone because they're never going to leave. Uh-huh. The higher up, the more autonomy. Depending on the business, that's kind of true. It depends. Like, we want you to be able to have the autonomy to get work done, but I don't know if that's true across the board. I think sometimes the higher up you get, the more you're like required to be in weird places in certain businesses.
Sure, you have different responsibilities.
Yeah.
You definitely have different you have different responsibilities that aren't tied to like I have to be here at 5:30 to open this shop.
Yeah,
Right.
but then sometimes you also have the responsibility to be there all the time, where some people get to come and go. So I would just throw that caveat. I know there's managers at places who just work all the time because they moved up versus the people who get to kind of come and go. But there's another level too.
Yeah, I think the intro paragraph's interesting because you're talking about, you don't have to be in a specific place at a specific time and you're kind of free of the day-to-day operations. In some ways, yes, if you compare it to a cafe where, you have a certain start time, be here at 5:30 so we can open at 6 and a certain end time, shift ends here. But it's not like people in the office aren't doing work on the day-to-day. Maybe you have a little bit more flexibility, like for you, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have a set of things that you are required to do. It doesn't live inside of a schedule box, but you still have to deliver. So you still definitely have day-to-day responsibilities. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff that like I have to do that fits in within the week, and I make up that schedule of like, oh, well, on Mondays I've decided that that's my day where I edit the podcast.
Right.
So that becomes a day-in-day thing. And then on
Right.
Tuesdays I have meetings, and so yeah.
And I think what you're talking about is cool because you have given yourself a structure. Okay, given that your job gives you a lot of freedom, if you take that freedom too far and run with it, then you don't hit any of your marks, right? You won't get anything done.
Sure.
So at some point, like, you have the autonomy, the structure is not gone. It has to be self-imposed.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you didn't have any of that structure and you're just like, I can do work whenever, and you don't do any, and then Friday comes or a month comes or whatever comes, and it's like, yeah, none of my projects are done. So that's one of the it's just that phrase day to day got me in terms of everyone does work every day, just in a different way. There's no like, I took a month off because I'm
Yeah.
totally flexed,
You
right?
just become more in charge of your time
you
management.
can go get lunch whenever you want, which
Yeah.
isn't true for people in the cafe. You could decide after working for 2 hours that I'm going to go for a run around the block. Like,
Or you
that's
might
a
work
freedom
all
that you
night.
have for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for that, it's like the more direct things that a guest coming through our doors is going to interact with the person who, restocked a condo stand more than they're going to interact with the thing you were working on before you went on a run, sort of thing. And that's what I think my headspace was coming from
yeah.
day to day, because it's like the condo stand gets restocked, 20 times a day. I write maybe 10 emails, like on a Monday. Like that's day to day for me is like the stuff that happens every day, sort of thing. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it is positional as well. I mean, even if I were to skip down
So
here.
you're telling me you don't do any work. This is going to be a good we're going to save some money in this conversation. This is going to be great.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's positional though too, right? Because if the impact of your work becomes bigger projects that are long term, you are still doing work, which I think is probably what you're going to prod at him a little bit at, is like you're still doing work in preparation of the deliverables. And some of that work, when you get to a certain level, requires you to be really intentional and thoughtful, which takes time, right? It takes sitting down and brainstorming, having conversations, some meetings, some not, trying to find the best way forward, especially if you're a decision maker, to whatever bigger project you're trying to put on. So you may have autonomy. You may be able to load your day however it works for you to move towards that project. But yeah, even though you only have 10 emails, you might be spending the next 8 hours of your day fully unable to focus on anything else if you want to do a good job, because you are focused on a big goal. And that goal might not be hit today. And people who are none the wiser may be like, what did that guy even do to none the wiser? See, you see what I did there? Chris didn't even get it. I was so quick.
The wiser.
But yeah, people who are unaware, right, might be like, well, Michael didn't do anything but write 10 emails today, right?
Yeah, I think the question ultimately was stemming from that, Chris, you had a drawing a while back where it was a boss and
I didn't
a
even know you
person.
drew, dude. Just
And
kidding.
they were both asking the same question.
Oh, like, what do you even do here?
What do you even do here?
What do you even do here? Yeah.
My Terry, my partner, she has this great story from when she was first working at UCSC, and she basically got student teachers paid, and oftentimes people would come into her office, and one time one of them came into her office like trying to figure something out, and then Terry was just swamped, but the person who came in was like, I have this problem, I need it solved right now. And the person was just like, what are you even busy with?
Yeah.
And Terry was just like, oh, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? So it's kind of, it's not asking that question of what you're busy with, but
Yeah.
it's asking the question of how do you communicate that? Or if you're removed enough, how do you stay connected to?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man.
I mean, it's a challenging one.
That's
I've been thinking
yeah.
about it a lot, and I think being a middle-sized company is maybe the hardest place to answer that question. It's a really challenging place. I feel like smaller, fairly easy. Obviously, we've been there before because you're
there.
You're physically, well, and you have to be in some capacity,
Yeah.
right? Then there's this liminal,
Subliminal.
horribly tough, weird place that, in my opinion, that we're in now, which is like, you're too big to be little, but you're too little to be big, right? And so in that transition is this place where a lot of people need to connect to a lot of different places of this business, which I think, depending on how it works for us, it's a struggle because you're kind of spread. And then I believe, which I could be absolutely wrong, but I'm going to put my chips on this. When you get big enough that you can resource the appropriate team to work with, you can have that feeling of having a really small connected team that then connects to another small connected team. We've painted this picture before, right? If we have great, amazing team leaders and a coordinator, then there's 2 people at a store who are able to really connect tightly with a group of 10 to 12, which means each one of them works we're going to say whatever, with 6 to 8 people.
Yeah.
Right? So you have 2 amazing leaders connecting with 6 to 8 people. Both are responsible for the entire store. One is ultimately able to make the call. And in a great world after that, if they don't need a ton of help with the people that work for them, you have somebody, whatever, like myself or a GM who's able to work with 4 to 6 amazing leaders and connect with them. Should the timing all work out, right? Which is something we're working through in this interim phase. If they have their systems, their training, all this stuff relatively hums, you got an ability to connect there, which can make it feel small. And to take it back to where I'm at now is it's like, if there's a need for the person who is, or anybody to connect beyond those core people, that's great. It's possible, but it does require an extension beyond like what one person is able to do, right? Like the way my therapist once gave me this, I thought it was wise. Like everybody is able to handle their own stuff, but they become overwhelmed when they start having to take on everybody else's stuff. And he was referring to that in the context of like taking on your parents' things, as we often are done. We're handed stuff from other people, and that doesn't work perfectly cleanly in an analogy with business, but it's also true, right? If you're able to handle, if you have a job that is your job, for the most part, with the exception of learning and obviously it being challenging, you could probably handle that. But the minute you need to step in and help with other people's jobs, it becomes more challenging. And I think that's where it is extremely hard in a middle-sized company. And it's hard all the time.
But why can't we do what you just described? Like, why can't that be how we operate now?
I think it can.
You know what I mean?
It's super challenging.
So if we have 4 cafes, a roastery, why can't Portola just be Portola? Why can't Swift just be Swift? Why can't, because one of the things we've talked about is if we put strong team leaders and coordinators at each cafe, the idea is that they operate like autonomous units in the same way. That's how it worked when we only had one location.
And I think we keep getting better at it, but I don't think there's a current tenure where we've had enough people running those stores for that long to feel super confident on their own. 100%.
Right. So I guess what I'm
I think it's still possible.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of poking at. Is it our size, or is it our, how we've set ourselves up in our circumstances?
I don't know. I'd say they all work. It's hard for me because I think they all work together. I think everything's connected, and that's how I look at things. I don't necessarily think you're wrong in poking at that.
Well, I guess why would it be easier when we're bigger?
I think when you're potentially larger, that you have. It's hard to tell. I think you have the ability to have more resources dedicated to different places.
Like monetarily?
I think a little bit monetarily, yes. And I think, well, yeah, I'd say at this point,
monetarily and just brain space too.
But I think brain space, right? To be able, with that monetary, right, to where you're going, and you can totally jump in. With that, maybe comes the ability to task less. Like people have a lot to do, but there's not necessarily a need for somebody to do more than what they're doing now. I just think that we are sharing that load, and we're learning to share that load across the board. And there's that learning phase. But if we didn't have to, then there's an ability to focus and be like, I can trust that for the most part, call it 80% of the time, this is how my brain, my time, this is what it's going towards. And I think when we have that mid-size, it's a little tougher. People have to pick up the paces a little bit.
For example, to speak back into the scale of things, and you guys are saying that I have autonomy to work on projects, but they're not tied to, a business that opens from 6:30 to 3. So in that, I can work on these things that I think are really important. These are tools like the shelf talkers in our cafes. We have a system that we're working on putting in place so that the team can utilize these shelf talkers, these tools, more better.
Mo better. I like it.
And I have the brain space to do that because I don't have, because I'm not required to be in there doing all these other tasks because I have the brain space for it. We're working on a new training system. We're working on this passport system that we're able to have the brain space for because you are in a position where you're in a leadership position where you're untied from, again, a space that's open from, set time to set time, where you have to be on the floor doing the guest service. And that's kind of where, again, it was coming from of like, you guys are removed from the things,
Mm-hmm.
the required things you have to do, and in a space where you get to do these things that your mental energy want to do. Woo! Outflow.
Oh, I wonder if it's about to get super
Super
real
real.
right here. No, they go around the side. We're about to
So
get a grease
does that
trap
make
pump.
more sense? So it's just like resources as far as mental energy makes a lot of sense to me. Not just like monetary, paying people for their time, which is important, but
Kind of. I'm just still not completely sold yet.
Sure.
Because it's like we don't work in the cafe at all.
Yep.
We don't work in the roastery at all. So what changes if we're 3 times the size? You know, we have and I think the way you're making the distinction is a little bit troublesome because you're like, because you're not here, you get to do these things. I think it paints one as a picture of this is work and this is extra, and I'd argue that they're both like equally important work, and you need them both to
Oh, 100%.
to work in tandem.
think
you know
of
what
it
I mean?
as think of it as last week we were moving the roastery,
Yeah.
and one of the big tasks was moving those pallet racks. I could lift one of those, like one of the cross beams by myself. It sucked, but I could do it. You get another person on there, instantly doubling your team, easier work. So that's where it's just like you have more ability to do more things when you grow and when you get bigger. When you have a bigger team, think of like if we had another cafe and we had another team leader and another coordinator, and they were going to the team leader meeting and there was a problem that came up. Well, now instead of having 4 people, you've got 5 people who are trying to figure it out. Or it's just kind of like a growth thing.
I don't think those analogies mesh because we're already at like a pretty decent size, right?
Oh,
It's
we
like,
are.
You know, it's not. I would argue. Well, because what you're arguing is that adding these more team leaders, adding another cafe, you're in this middle-sized business that things become more challenging, and then at some point they become less challenging. So I'm asking, what fundamentally changes to make it less challenging?
Yeah. Well,
Because-
my hope would be that that there is more support for that group that you're speaking of, right? More resources physically, human-wise, so that team leaders and coordinators, right, are able to support that team specifically and consistently without as much need for problem solving. And I think that requires space for us and team leaders, and by us I mean anybody who has the space in executive leadership and team leaders to be able to spend time solving problems.
What are those? What do those resources look like? Like, what are they specifically?
For me, everything is space and time, right? So that requires that it basically either is that, we haven't, if I'm trying to problem solve it, we or any company, right, didn't or hasn't put enough time into solidifying foundations from the beginning, or haven't had the resources of human beings to be able to button up a program. And therefore, the work is harder for across the whole company, we could say, right? So whether that's happened or doesn't in any other company, that's where I feel like the resource management is helpful. The ability to problem solve, have somebody who is able to just spend their time, or somebody's actively pursuing better, creating and clarifying and training a system, right? With everything that you learn comes like a reiteration, a training, time spent, clarity, integration, right? You have this idea that comes from 20,000 million feet down to how we use it every single day. And everybody needs to understand that. So for me, what maybe forever will be the challenge, or that I'm hoping and feeling like the dedication of resources to will allow us to have space to solve those problems in completion. Or we have this other side, which I believe you're probably going to speak to, which is like, no matter what, we're going to have this and you're going to have to chip away indefinitely. I just have it comes down to like the time you can or want to spend on how long the process is.
I don't disagree with your philosophy. I'm more disagreeing with the size aspect of it, because it's like we have that opportunity right now. You know what I mean? We have the freedom and the flexibility to do all those things right now. It seems like it's more of just like we haven't done them, so we need to do. There's certain foundations we haven't set up, so we need to set them up. But it doesn't seem like our size is holding us back. If anything, it's we have a fresh group of leaders in the cafes, so
Sure.
there's it would be different if we had people who were tenured at if each team leader had 3 years under their belt.
That
As a
would be
team
helpful
leader,
for sure. So
that would be
I
like
hear
a
you there.
completely
Yeah,
different
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
right?
I guess what we're looking at is a concept versus, I guess to me, which would be the reality, right? If we had a few more resources, then, because I hear you, we have this group, but in our conversation on Friday, it was like, hey, is there anybody anywhere who can utilize time to cover shifts on the floor when people get sick? And like, we do need to work on being better at that as a whole, but there wasn't any extra resources really for that.
Right, but okay, cool.
You know what I'm saying?
This is good.
This is kind of how that gets going. So you're
Yeah.
like, if we had more resources, maybe we have 1 or 2 more people, 3 more people to start filling those gaps
See,
in some capacity, which would allow us to maybe spend time problem solving.
well, this gets
somebody's.
kind of messy, and it's like this kind of it's hard to talk about this in a way that doesn't seem like I'm putting somebody on blast. So this is just like hypothetical.
Yeah.
Right? It's like cuz everything flows uphill, right? So it's like fuck.
Well, it's all challenging, so I get it. It's like a challenging concept too.
Well, no, just like I don't even know how to talk about this based on like the feedback that we got last week. Because
Right.
we were talking about things on the podcast and someone was like, "Oh, it sounds like you're putting your employees on blast." And it's like, "No, that's not it, but this is like these are like real things that we're working through." So here's some ways that I think about things, and I'm willing to accept whatever responsibility like we have in part of this,
Sure.
right? So it's like, let's say you have an organization of 70 plus people like we do, right? All the way from the top down, it's like there's no way that I'm going to have an intimate, deep relationship with 70 plus people. It's just not possible. Like there's not enough of any one person to go around and develop solid relationships with each individual human.
And most people don't do that in their regular life as well. So
Most
how could
people
they at
don't.
work?
Yeah, I definitely don't have 70 friends. Not
Yeah.
even nowhere close.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have everything breaks down into handfuls. It's like you have a handful of people that you really trust.
Yeah.
You have a handful of people you have these deep, meaningful relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you even see that in things like the military too, where they have like breakout teams. It's usually like 4 or 5 from what I've read.
Mm-hmm.
So, the whole group is much, much larger, right?
Yeah,
But there's
the team.
someone
Mhm.
in control of or responsible for like this smaller group of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel very comfortable having a deep relationship with the people on the executive team, and even more specifically, the smaller slice of the executive team that I work with on a regular basis.
Right.
Right. That's you, Weiser. That's you, Charles, Gessler. It's like that's like my core
Right.
Cat and Cloud group, and I have good relationships with everybody else on the executive team, but it's just not as deep as those.
Right.
And then it goes out from there, and that's why team leaders at the cafe are so important, because they, like, in my perfect world, you could see someone like Jorge, you could see someone like Kylie, and in the best version of everything, it's like people look up to that person with the same reverence and awe and inspiration that is usually only reserved for,
owner.
CEOs or
Yep.
business owners or whatever.
This
because
is why we totally.
my gut feeling is there's nothing special about the people that decided to start the business other than they decided to start the business, right? Like everybody has the opportunity to step up and be a leader and lead people. And that's why they're so important, because at scale, it can't operate. And then there's like this little side cultural thing that's happening too, which is the workers who work here, the frontliners, need to really be here because they love the work and also believe in the mission of the company more
Right.
so than just, I want to get FaceTime with the owner, because that's not sustainable, or is it really useful? You know what I mean? It's not.
Absolutely.
So if we could reach an ideal, let's say, where each individual cafe could operate like its own little sovereign state that's, okay, cool, like it brings in the values and the framework and the structure of the greater company, but it's its own thing. The team leader at the cafe is responsible for how the cafe works.
Yeah.
Then when things like what you're describing happen, like, hey man, we don't have anybody to cover shifts, it's like, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not putting any of our employees on blast. I'm just saying in this world where that can happen, like it has to be owned fully by the cafe, because the greater universe of Cat and Cloud is not responsible for providing frontline employees to run each individual cafe, even given that one of our values is teamwork, something we really value, right?
Mhm.
Teamwork isn't, you know, there's this dance between teamwork and responsibility. Like teamwork isn't picking up the pieces for everybody else. Teamwork is allowing everybody to work on their own highest contribution and being able to do great things together.
Yeah.
You know, so in that, and then like here's where our ownership piece is. It's like, have we created an environment? Have we created a system? Have we trained effectively enough for whoever the team leaders are to be able to fill those slots when they need to be able
and to feel that connectivity.
or even just on something as simple as the staffing.
Oh.
Like, have we taken the time to say like, okay, here's how projections work. Here's how summer months work. Here's like here's how you would like estimate expected rates of attrition. Here's how you yada, 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 all of these things. And, you know, I don't know. Like, I think we're still getting there. Like, I don't think.
Same.
And that's kind of what we talked about on Friday is like, I think there is a huge opportunity for us to work more closely with the people who are team leaders and just get them, I hate to say training because it makes it sound like it's a kid, but just like to be able to like impart more knowledge or share more tips and tricks of the trade. And
well, and sometimes it's just even I think that's the thing is I think our team is so talented and they're hired to be team leaders and coordinators because they've earned the right to speak on behalf of the company. So what I feel like I'm hearing more in those conversations is I want to make sure I'm doing a good job and moving in the right direction. And they're because of the lack of tenure and like the inexperience is specifically maybe a team leader, they don't have sometimes the confidence that maybe we have had because of our need at times, just because we have to make a decision because it's our company, right? To make certain decisions. They might need an ear, they might need a head. Sometimes more so than they maybe even need training, and then the calibration confirms what they maybe already know, in my belief. And
sure.
I'm hearing that a lot.
I don't disagree with you either.
Yeah, I don't
think
think you do either.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are way more capable than they give themselves credit for.
I would say all of our team leaders are a lot better than they give themselves credit for. I would personally believe that. However, I can absolutely see that it can feel lonely out there and like you're a little bit on an island when you are that person and you are young, because I feel that way. Not being quote unquote young, even though I would say I'm a young business owner, I think we feel that way a lot. You kind of feel like you're on an island.
Sure.
So I do.
Big truck.
Expo Logics,
big
logistics. I think we got some green coffee coming in. So
that
yeah,
dude pulled in here like a champ.
he did pretty good.
Yeah.
We
We're in a really, and again,
your ideal is what we set out to do. Like that is how we've always said this has to work.
And
It's
I
the
just got to
only
make
way.
it super clear that I'm not putting anybody on blast. I'm like speaking in hypothetical situations. You know what I mean?
Hypothetical,
Some of them,
business would
hypothetical, idealistic
some of
situations.
them definitely happen, right? It's like we run into those staffing things. We run into these things. So it's like, I guess what I'm saying is in terms of, I don't necessarily know if like we get to a certain point and then all the resources just like fall from heaven, because what I see is as things get bigger, people have more deniability because things become much more fuzzy to where it's like, you know, when you have one cafe, it's like if you have one cafe,
everybody goes for that.
Whose job is it to hire, staff, train, everything in the cafe? Well, it's obviously the manager, the team leader, the owner of the cafe. You know, there's no fuzziness into what needs to happen. It's like, we have to get this done. But then when you have a cafe and then you have some business owners and there's some people in the office, it's like, oh yeah, I don't know. Well, we really need this resource. We need that resource. We need that resource. Scale it up when companies get even bigger. Then there's an HR department and it's like, oh yeah, it's really HR's job to do this, this, that. And we have a recruiter, this, and that. And then it's like,
yeah, it could be like that.
I mean, it's like that most places. I
would hope that we wouldn't be like that, but it could be like that.
I mean, I see it here a little bit, and I think that's, again, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. That's on us for setting up this system, but I think it's it It definitely happens.
Mhm.
Not just in the cafe. I mean, it happens with our work too. You know,
Mhm.
it's not only a frontliner thing. I mean, when we're in the executive team and we're just batting around ideas, sometimes we'll come up with something, and then it's like, okay, go, and everyone just kind of like, well,
Who's
who,
doing what?
what, yeah, and then
Yeah.
it's like, I need this, and then I need that, and then
I th-
like I didn't do this because this didn't happen.
I think what I'm hearing is, or something that I'm thinking of is level of importance. So a team leader for a cafe is going to have a different importance for a social post about their hours than I, as the marketing team leader, is going to have about it. To where it's so
Like in the scope of the big
in the
picture,
scope of the
right?
big picture, it's so how do you
There's
communicate
perspective.
that? How do you communicate those importances so that everybody understands what one another is thinking? As far as directly speaking, last year when we were having like all these staffing issues and staffing issues, as in like people were being sick,
Yeah, COVID
round
waves.
COVID waves, and we were having to post a lot of like temporary hours and stuff like that. All of the team leaders would be like, "Hey, we're going to be closed tomorrow with this. Can you post this on social?" And it just got to be a point where it's like every day we were posting a new like, "Hey, Portola is going to be closed," and it's like a majority of the people that were seeing those posts online are people that don't even live here. So for me, it was just like, what message are we sending? And
Do
is
you
this
know that for a fact though?
yeah,
How?
analytics, baby.
You can see where the people live
Yeah.
that are looking.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And so it's just buy green truck. He's staying.
Nah, he's just stopping.
Yeah. So it's just like are multiple things. Are the people who actually is that information going to actually be important to? Are they going to actually see it in a timely manner? Questionable. Is it reaching the amount of people? Like, it's just like, what are we doing? Are we informing the people who need to know, or are we showing to everybody else that, hey, like, things are really kind of wild here right now?
Well,
Like, it's so that I'm not saying
Yeah.
like I'm not trying to be on either side of that argument. I'm just trying to say like
No, I just think that's the
team
reality
leaders
of what's
thought
happening.
it was really important to post on social that we were closing at a certain time, where all I was seeing was all we were doing was posting that we were closing at different times. So it's just like, having that line of communication between the two ends where it's like I'm up here looking at a bigger picture and they're down here looking at like we have to close at 2 today. So it's like it's bridging that gap.
that doesn't feel like it's directly connected to what I was talking about, but
No, yeah,
on
that's why I was
yeah,
saying,
like I don't know, and that's interesting because I feel like you both have valuable points of view.
Yeah,
you know,
so for me-
because on one end, well, and our situation dictates a lot of what's going to be happening, right?
Yeah.
So if we're in the middle of the pandemic, kind of the rules for social engagement are a little bit different than they are, or the norms for social engagement are a little bit different than they are in non-pandemic times.
Yeah.
Because people are expecting wild and crazy hours. After those, after the first several months, people are like, okay, we're in for a roller coaster for the
Yeah.
next who the fuck knows how long. And I know for me as a customer of places, I would always like Instagram was the place that I would go to check to see if people were even open.
Yeah.
So maybe as a smaller percentage, maybe a small percentage of the people who were viewing our Instagram were looking at it to check hours, but to those, maybe 20 or 30 out of 40,000 who see our posts, like that means a lot. So I would say those things are kind of in tandem. They're both equally important. I wouldn't say that they're, that is tricky because there are
Yeah.
different kinds of big pictures,
Yeah.
right? Because like
So-
you're a support, you have your own role in terms of things like the web store and stuff, but all the things you create support the bigger thing.
Yeah.
Support and the cafes are, kind of a very big part of Cat and Cloud's footprint.
Yeah.
Right.
So what I was basically saying with all of that was basically aligning on like we're working on this because it's important for XYZ sort of thing.
Right. Well, I
And-
mean,
and
my
that's-
brain lives in a place in between those, which is you essentially have identified. I mean, and maybe your example is not the perfect one for this, but in the concept would be
Story of my life.
no, it works. I think it actually works, but it works in this context, which is, I think, where you bring it back to this conversation and where resources or time or dedication helps is like you identified what you just said there to a bit of an issue, a couple different issues. There's an issue of how do we communicate something well, right? And it sounds like there's a good way of, as a company, you're putting something out there which is better than nothing. You're saying it's not going to the people we'd like for it to be communicated to as much as we'd like. There's an issue, right? But that's kind of what I'm talking about across the board. Like this is the struggle with resources is a lot of the things we're seeing is we would like to elevate the experience of working here, being a part of this, training, education. Like we see all of these opportunities for growth as we grow, and you continue to do that. Time and size, right? Like the amount of time you're open, you see things that don't work as well as you thought they did. You need to evolve them. What I think I struggle with and what I'm bringing up in this conversation is we don't have a lot of time and resources, nor do our team leaders and coordinators to recreate and reintegrate, right? That's where I think I keep struggling with. Where do you find, and maybe this is just a good question for everybody and an opportunity for us, and that's what we've begun working on, talking about even more in depth on Friday, even though we've talked about this a lot, is how do we reallocate or allocate in general resources to elevating, locking in, creating, recreating this foundation that worked for a long time and now needs to evolve, knowing that I wouldn't feel necessarily comfortable because of the time constraints putting it on a team leader and a coordinator, but I still believe and need that team leader and coordinator to be able to own, operate, run, and live by whatever those things are independently for us to be able to ever do anything even more or as well as we could, right? So that's where I feel like I live in this paradox of how do we make that happen well? And it feels like that's where you could be like, well, if I had a little more resources in some capacity for whoever, then we would be able to have more time to dedicate it to that. Otherwise, you are facing what we are doing, which is putting, and maybe this is just with every business, right? You just have to change the way you're doing things now to conquer that mountain, right? You change the way we all run resources for a little bit to prioritize. And that's where maybe Weiser's talking about importance is like, we all do need to clarify what's the most important for now to make the world better later. And that's what I live in is like, how do you identify those things? Where do we put what, when, with the people we have?
Because there's an opportunity cost to everything.
Exactly.
And there's
That's
a
the
finite
challenge.
amount of time, attention, and money always. That's like one of the,
Right.
I don't know if it's the hardest thing about
triangle
running
thing.
a business, but it's kind of one of the most annoying things.
It's a frustrating
We're
thing.
recording outside because we don't have the money to.
Yeah, it was
have
just
a
raining
space.
on us.
And
We were
it's
recording
fine.
in the rain.
It's
and
fine.
It's great.
You know what I mean? That's minor. But I guess, I'm not saying that more resources would be bad. That's not
I don't
what
think
I'm
you are
saying.
either. It's a good
And
argument.
I'm just kind of more saying is like, if we suddenly grow, does that actually mean we have more resources? Because
Yeah,
sometimes
not necessarily.
sometimes it feels like as we grow, we do a lot more, but time gets almost tighter. Things are trickier. You know, things are like, sure, we have more resources in some ways, but it's not like adding another cafe or growing a certain amount of wholesale like magically shifts. I feel like the situation is more of the same.
No,
almost,
I hear
you.
I hear you. I think what we're speaking to is you need to be able to find ways to reallocate work together and prioritize.
Yeah.
Because I hear you. It's like people wonder, oh, how do you just open another cafe? You must be killing it. It's like, not really. You take a very, very small loan out and then you made a bet on Chris, Charles, and I's houses that we're going to be successful in 10 years.
You sign the paper.
This is something that
And people think you have a lot of money to do that, but you don't actually have a lot of money to open a cafe.
we talked about this on Friday when we were going over to the garage. And it was just like, how do you align expectations of what the frontliners think a boss or an owner is supposed to be? Like,
Oh yeah.
because to me that like the frontliner's going to be like, that goes back to the drawing where it's just like, what do they even do here? Like they don't show up. I'm here every day. How do you inform them of what you're working on and
Well, you
why it's
don't.
important?
I mean, it's a show don't tell situation.
Yeah.
Like when I drew that drawing, I
Yeah.
think the reason that people, owners and employees talk crap about each other is because there's something negative going on that's either left unsaid or, swept under the rug, or there's some sort of tension that's not right. I think in a ideal world, you as the business owner, like a huge chunk of your responsibility is to set up the environment that people can do their best work in, right?
Yeah.
You provide this vision, you provide a mission, you're inspirational, not as just a human being, but you're like, hey, this is how the world could be a better place if we do this thing. Here is the positive impact that can happen, and this is the way we do it. Like, it's not the only way to do it, but like
This is what we believe.
This is the Cat and Cloud way, and coffee for us is our conduit. You could do the same thing with all kinds of stuff. You know, we believe in hospitality, we believe in service, we believe in the amazing things that happen when you can come into a place and be truly cared for. And that's really special. So that doesn't happen by itself, so our job is to both tell those stories, inspire people, set up some level of training, and create an environment where those things can flourish. Like, if we do a good job of that, it's much more likely that the employees are going to come in and have this positive experience. And it's not, 10 out of 10. There's always some things that are amiss,
Humans are
but
humans.
overall, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has bad days. Everybody, whatever. We're not perfect, not by a long shot. But when you have those places where those things are clear and the foundation is set, it's much easier to come to work and focus on what you need to do. And you're not ever wondering, like, man, I don't even know what Chris does. I don't even know. But once things start to get a little hairy, once you start working, I've worked overtime like 5 days in a row. Like, I don't get any training or education from my manager. I don't actually know why I'm here. No one talks to me about the contribution that I'm having ever. I haven't had a review in 3 months. I've been here for a year and no one's ever even said, like, hey, I saw this, this, and that. I've never got feedback. I don't even know how I'm doing. Like, once all those things start to happen, then it's just like, what the fuck do those guys even do? And that's not a completely ridiculous question, because if none of those things are happening, what is the ownership doing? What are they doing? And I totally get it, because I've been that guy, and I see how easy it is to slip into that, because this goes back to your original question too, because once you start to build something of scale and it starts to generate a certain amount of revenue, revenue that allows you to have the freedom and flexibility that you're talking about, it is a lot easier to just kind of pull the Homer Simpson and just kind of like back into the bushes and just kind of write a check for yourself and not do the work of continuing to perpetuate that awesome culture. And if you don't do that, like, we all know what businesses look like when the owner has no involvement. Even if their involvement doesn't have anything to do with them showing up in the cafe every day. And that's why I say show, don't tell. It's like, you see it, you feel it, it's a palpable energy.
Yeah.
So I get why employees ask that. And then it's the same thing on the flip side for the owners to the employee. Like, when the employees are crushing it, no big deal. The owner's not mad. But when the employees are kind of slacking or hanging around or complaining about this, whether it's like pay range or hours or yada, 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 it's really easy as a business owner to be like, the fuck are you doing? Do your job, right? But it's a circular feedback loop. It's like, well,
That's a sign that something else is happening.
it's a sign that something else is wrong, and that ultimately comes back to you. It's like, okay, and that's what I was talking about earlier. It's like, if, and I always say Portola because it's our first location. I'm not actually calling out Portola, but it's like, if Portola is constantly understaffed, over and over and over again, I'm not even saying that's the case, but if it was, at some point, we have to look at ourselves, not just the person who's running Portola, and say, like, have we set up this person, whether that's training, whether that's expectation,
or the space, maybe.
It's like, it's a whole laundry list of things, like, because at some point we can't just point the finger at everybody else. Like, every party has to take responsibility. Every party is entering into an agreement in their own free will, and everybody has a responsibility to do the work. So, that was a big rant.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to think. Go.
I was just gonna try to tie that to like stuff that's happening right now, where it's just like we're dealing with trying to like keep people on and not have as much, attrition. And there is some of that conversation of like, what are you working on? And we're realizing that like, oh, we need to work on our training so that people are equipped with these tools. I don't know. I lost my train of thought, but like it's
that's a perfect example because at some point, because there have been some staffing issues, and it would be really easy for me to go back to that ideal world and say like, hey, you're a sovereign-owned cafe. You just fucking deal with it, right?
Yeah. But what you're working on now is we are coming together and working on, all right, cool.
But like,
how can
the
we
symptoms
equip
that are maybe contributing?
What are the things that are contributing? What
how
can we
has Santa
do?
Cruz evolved since we opened this company, and do we need to look at things differently because that's what it is? Do we not? Do we not? Like we're exploring it all because we care.
And that's how you have to enter the agreement. Both parties have to enter the agreement in good faith as well. To where it's like, I need to believe in a situation like that the person who is the leader of that cafe or that department, whatever, is doing the best that they can. They're getting checked in with by the person who they're most connected with. Everybody reports to somebody in some way, shape, or form. It's like, and I'm not believing that they're just slacking just for funsies, right? So if there's a problem that ends up happening over and over again, it's worth taking a closer look at and seeing, okay, how do we need to fix this? Like, what can we do to, again, create that environment or set up the system? And that's what we're doing, to where it's like, okay, what's actually the most efficient way to onboard people? Because we have this old system that's fine, but it's not great. It's it keeps certain people out. It's a little bit confusing. It's very strict for reasons that made sense at the time, but probably don't make sense anymore. So if we as an ownership group can start to work on that and then pass that down, everybody's work gets easier.
I mean, you can see that reflected in bigger companies too. The most recent simple one for me, which love my Disney, but it's
I was just about to say Disney,
but it is right. You have this Bob Iger character, which guaranteed all of those hundreds of thousands of employees have no idea what he's doing day in and day out. They trust him. Passes it on to this dude, Bob Chapek. And the feelings from the team are loud enough over time that between the team and the world, they start renaming this dude Bob Paycheck because they like the way that things got integrated, made it feel like this dude's penny pinching and making nickel and diming all the guests and everybody, so that the company makes a lot of money in ways that take away from what they do in the core and the heart and the soul.
Yeah.
And then as soon as Bob Iger comes back, even though he's technically given like a really hard, they both were given something hard, by the way. I don't know. I don't think Bob Chapek did a good job. Running Disney's hard.
Typically easy
pandemic
job.
Hard. But Bob Iger comes back, and there's this immediate belief that the company is going to be better. And does he do everything perfectly? Guaranteed no. But there's a belief in a known truth, and it's felt across the world that this place is going to go back in a direction that is better. And then it begins feeling better there. And that's the same concept where it's like it is a two-way street. Somehow this dude Bob Iger, who for sure has never shook hands or high-fived or even said hi to probably 70% of the people who work there, is believed in enough by the masses that they're willing to keep doing what they do. Yeah. Imperfectly as it is, because that organization is not perfect, and there's so much work I'm sure that can be done, but there's a challenge. And that's what that's what you try to do as an owner and a leader, is find a way to connect people to a bigger picture and where we're going and how we do things, and find a way to show them it matters. Yeah.
And we do that really good example.
And as you were saying, Chris, that there's a level of trust. Well,
he painted it perfectly because there is, the leader-follower relationship begins with an act of faith and belief.
Yep.
And then over time, each party has the opportunity to either reinforce that belief or break it down. And then you have a track record. So when you get the new CEO and he starts blowing it right away, and they switch back to Iger, even though Iger hasn't even done anything yet, it's his first day in office, because of that track record, everyone's like,
we're good.
Breath of fresh air.
Yep.
Everything's going to be fine.
Yep.
And that in and of itself creates change in the organization.
Right. Every single leader on the way from zero to hero, whatever that means, but
just like that.
Yeah, I just used a Disney. I had to do it. That's why I did it. But it's true. Like, then the quality of work changes too. What we could argue anywhere is that the level of belief and involvement and dedication that the leader that works directly with you has in the company, the work that's going on, is going to reflect on everybody who works for them. So that's where you have this opportunity. So if everybody doesn't believe in Bob Chapek, they don't do as good a work, and that feeling filters everywhere.
Also,
even if they do the same level of work, but they don't put in the energy and morale boosting energy that goes with it, it actually doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, and
So
Bob
it
just
all
came
works
in
together.
with the worst last name ever.
I
Like
know,
he
dude.
just kind of
Chapek is not
pre-roasted
very-
himself,
I
dude.
know, dude.
Paycheck. It was just written
It
on the
was like,
wall.
they're like, we can just switch
They're just
this all
like
around.
waiting for him. It's like, oh, I'm gonna get this motherfucker.
Yeah, dude.
dude.
Somebody saw it, they're like, that spells it perfect.
People walking. Hey,
just
paycheck.
add a Y. Just add a Y.
Paycheck.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, let us know, or tell a friend. These are the types of connections that are the most important to us and that we seek to create every day. If there's something you heard and you want to know more about, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com or head to our website, catandcloud.com/podcast, and let us know. While you're on our site, check out everything we have to offer. Dive deep into one of our single origin coffees or pick up a little treat for yourself. We have something for everyone, so check it out. Also, find us in the usual places, YouTube, Instagram. We're always there sharing amazing things. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for being awesome. We'll be back next week.